One.
Welcome to the latest ENEX webinar. ENEX is the world's largest association of commercial news broadcasters, includes RTL in Germany, of course, and more than 75 other channels all across the world. Many journalists and executives from these television companies we know are watching, but we've made the event public so that people from other places who are tuning in, please, you are also free to send us your questions, and we'll try to address them in our conversation. Please use the Zoom app or Facebook Messenger to ENEX News. That's all one word, ENEX News. My name's Tim Marshall. I'm a former foreign correspondent and presenter at the ENEX UK partner, Sky News. This is the third webinar in our series. We started with the US elections, then the climate crisis, and today we wanted to speak with someone at the global political level, someone who can bring together those topics and link to many more. So we're delighted to be joined live from Berlin by the leader of the SPD, Olaf Scholz. Mr. Scholz is Germany's finance minister, Vice-Chancellor, and the SPD candidate to become Chancellor in next year's elections. Welcome, Mr. Scholz. And thank you very much. It's good of you to join us. I know all your weeks are busy, but it's a particular busy week, certainly in the news business as well. A new president-elect in the USA. Germany, alas, going back into lockdown, as we are in the UK and several EU countries. And of course, there's economic shocks. But this is also a chance to congratulate a German company for the potential breakthrough in a vaccine. We'll come to that. But the first question, Minister, it's been a rocky 4 years in the German-US relationship. I think you would admit that. What changes do you expect this change in leadership to bring?
This is a new chance for transatlantic partnership. I think it is absolutely key that we understand that there is there are a lot of common interests between the United States and Europe, and the NATO is one of the symbols of this cooperation. But there is more in it. It is not just interest in questions of safety. It's also something which brings us together when we look at democracy, the rule of law, and other questions which are important for us. And so it's better we cooperate, though there may be and there are different views on one or the other topic. And making this feasible and possible again is, I think, of highest importance.
Do you think multilateralism has taken a back step in the past 4 years?
It became more difficult, yes. And it is really a pity. My view on the world, how it's developing, is a bit different to what we read in many newspapers today. I think it will be not a new bipolar world after the post-war situation between the United States and the USSR. It will be still Russia, it will be the USA, it will be China, but there will be a lot of other rising Asian nations. This, I think, is the main change in the world that happened in the last 50, 60 years. And my view is that there will be a side of China, still Korea, there will be Japan, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, India. And if we look at the world of 2050, there will be strong nations, one or two from Africa or South America. And my view in this case is that it is absolutely necessary that we make it happen, that this will be a world that is governed by rules and accepted rules and fair cooperation and multilateralism. And to work on that will be only possible for us in Europe if we cooperate. And this is the big task of the European Union.
Within those different blocks in what you describe as essentially a multipolar world, obviously the European Union is a big block, and therefore is it not, even within multilateralism, competition for the Americans? I mean, can you move back to at least the tone of the relationship prior to the previous 4 years?
Yes, and we should. I think it is necessary that we discuss the questions where we have to find common solutions. And it is not necessary that we are at the same, that we have common views when we start the debate. We have to find them. But this is the big task of good politics, and it has to happen between the United States and Europe.
Well, Mr. Biden is known as the great conciliatory figure, so you appear to be tuned into that wavelength. Over here, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson is, as I understand it from Downing Street, beginning to look at this idea of the group or the club of democracies, the D10 as it's sometimes called, in the idea being that the big democracies around the world, Canada, United States, Australia, yourself, etc., should be a loose affiliation, perhaps a sort of different version to the BRICS. Do you support that?
I think it's not really important whether we find a way to organize it. It's important that we have the understanding that this is something that we have together, that we are supporting the idea of democracy and the rule of law. And it must be clear that it could not work if the idea is that we are just following the interest of a country, saying our country first, and saying that the solution for all the problems is that we deal with someone, may he be a dictator or something like this, don't mind. The most important question is, what is the outcome for yourself? I think we have to find a way of cooperating, which is also always following the idea that there is more in our life which is important, and democracy and rule of law, which I mentioned quite often now, are of essence for that.
Turning to, well, it's not domestic politics, is it? It's international, but Brexit and the Brexit deal, which is now coming down to the wire. We have 6 days left. Do you agree that a Biden presidency perhaps has made it very difficult for Britain to go for a no deal? Because as you know, Mr. Biden is warning that if no deal harms the Good Friday Agreement, a UK-US deal is harder. Do you think he's boxed in, the British Prime Minister?
I have to be, and I want to be diplomatic, since my view on this question is that we should work on a deal, a cooperation up to the last second. And you really know that the European Union made absolutely clear that we have an agreement and it should not be broken. And we all made clear together that the Good Friday Agreement is something which is of highest importance for a safe life and for the development of Northern Ireland and Ireland. And so I think this is something that is well understood also in the UK.
Where does the UK sit in your thinking, completely post-Brexit, which is next January, in the sort of the family of European democracies? Because it's outside of the European. So how does it fit into Europe?
We are together in Europe. We have good relations with each other for a long time, and this should be the case also in future. But anyone should understand that there is a reason behind building the European Union, and that if we want to defend our sovereignty, the only way to do it successfully is having more progress to a better union, to say it with these American words, in Europe. And just this year, we made a very big step forward in this case, because anyone knows that we were missing a fiscal union. We have the banking union, we have political progress in many fields, but not in the fiscal field. But the decisions of which are supporting a common European answer to the COVID-19 pandemic and its economic impacts is, I think, the first step for something that is very near to a fiscal union that is successful and strong.
I'm going to come back to fiscal union in a moment, vis-a-vis COVID and other matters. So thank you for bringing it up. Just to finish on the US, EU side, but also you mentioned NATO. Do you think NATO can regain its confidence? Well, I put it to you that it has lost some confidence and taken some blows because of the attitude of its main party, the USA, in the past few years. Can it regain its confidence? And also, what is the greatest external threat to the EU and NATO in your view?
There is an old word that has been used in the 70s and 80s, which I proved it not anyone understands anymore. If you discuss to younger people, it's common security. And I think this is the big task we have to work on in the world. we have to be strong with our own military means, and NATO is important for us to be able to defend ourselves. But also it is necessary that we understand that the task we have outside of NATO is to make it possible that anyone is sticking to the rules we have. So there had been a lot of very successful agreements in the Conference on Security in Europe and others that worked very successfully. And we have to go back to this also in trying to have a new start in negotiations on reducing, for instance, nuclear arms and so on. And this is, I think, one of the big tasks NATO should work on.
Well, as you know, the START treaty runs out in February, and that's about a week after the new president comes in. That's going to be very, very pressing. If in the event that you become Chancellor next year, will you be increasing Germany's defense budget? Because there are NATO members that feel that Germany doesn't quite put enough effort into military activity.
We increased it. And since I'm the finance minister of Germany, we increased it more than in all the years before. The bad times for spending for military activities was not after I came into office, it was before. But the important question, I think, is that we understand that Germany will be within the EU the partner that is contributing the most to NATO.
Briefly, before we move on to more cheerful subjects like COVID, where do you stand on the formation of an EU army, even within as a wing of NATO?
I think we have to cooperate in military questions in the EU. And I think that many people should understand there is a big support in Germany for the idea of having something like this. It is quite difficult. 10 years, 15, 20 years ago, I would have said, this is the last thing we do when forming the European Union. Possibly we should remember that the first attempt to form something which is the now developed European Union was the attempt to do it with a military union. I think we have to think about that question, how we can cooperate better. And this is especially in the fields of military industry and the production, which is necessarily something which cannot be managed only by one country due to the spending that is that we have to do for develop the right military defense infrastructure. And so cooperation is of highest importance. If we look at all the money that is spent by the member states of the EU to defense, it is quite a lot. And if you would understand it as a union and it would be managed like, for instance, in the United States, you could imagine that this would have some strength. But it is differentiated between 27 nations, and there are some difficulties coming from that. So better cooperation and starting into this direction is really something that is necessary.
You mentioned cooperation twice there, which nicely leads me to the one bit of good news, the potential vaccine. And even in my head, and I was formulating a question, I was thinking by Pfizer. You must be a bit irritated in Germany that Pfizer is getting the global headlines, but as I understand it, this was a 50-50 cooperation with BioNTech, one of your leading companies. Are they getting the headlines in Germany?
They are getting on the headlines of Germany, and it is the other way around, as you explained it to the world's press situation. My view is that it is really something where we can be very happy. We are very happy that we made it possible and that this is something which is coming from the research infrastructure, the business infrastructure of Germany. There is a high potential. Germany is playing a very important role in high technology fields, especially also this one we are discussing about now with BioNTech. And I think it is a good message that they are where they are now and that they could announce that they are going the last step. And it is a good information to know that they are not the only one. There may come some others afterwards.
And as you say,
from Germany.
Transatlantic cooperation. Forgive me, I know you're not the health minister, but could you tell us, do you know anything of the plans to roll it out? For example, in this country, we think we'll have 10 million doses in December, given first to people in care homes, second comes health staff, and we have this tier system. Are you doing something similar?
We worked out how we could bring it to the people. It's quite difficult because you have to do a lot of technical assistance to make it happen. But this is prepared. So we have agreements with the 16 states within Germany. We have agreements with our military infrastructure. We have agreement with some others to make it easier to bring it to the 16 states, and they will transport it to all these centers where the vaccine will be available for those who need it. And now we also took decisions who will get it first. It must be the people that working in the health sector. It must be the most vulnerable groups in our population. It will take some time to get it to all the people that want to have a vaccine. But when we have this and the others, it will be a good chance that we get out of the difficulties, most difficult parts of this economic and health situation we are in.
I'll risk being flippant, Vice-Chancellor. Remind me the translation of Voortdurchsprungtechniek. This is the phrase we all know.
Yes, it is a car. It's an ad for a car, and it was being ahead with technology.
That was where I was reaching for that connection. Okay, I'm afraid we must talk about the negative, obviously, the negative side of COVID as well. Germany rebounded, the economy rebounded after the first wave more quickly than many nations. And you could argue that was partly the strength of the economy, and you could argue it was partly due to that huge stimulus package you introduced. Now you've gone into, I think you call it lockdown light, on the 2nd of November. And I looked at the Fitch ratings the other day. You are, of course, still AAA. Nevertheless, Fitch and others believe your GDP will shrink next year. So are you going to need another stimulus package?
We have already made it feasible that a lot of money flows to the economy this year and the next year. And you see it at the figures of our economy. There is a better development on the labor market than anyone expected. There is a better development if you look at the different sectors of the economy. Even the export is running better than anyone expected. And we think that we will be back at the level of pre-crisis conditions latest in the beginning of 22, possibly a bit earlier. And this is still so. This is also why we decided to handle the situation in November like we are doing it now. We looked at some sectors of the economy where a lot of contacts are happening, which is obviously anything that has to do with tourism and restaurants and cultural events and people and sport events and people coming together for this 1 month. But we combined it with the decision to give even more aid to this certain sector involved into this decision, as we did before with our stimulus package and our stabilizing activities. And so I hope, and it looks like that I'm hoping rightly, that we will have not a too worse effect on economic development and that we will continue the good path and on the good path.
Forgive me, that you appear to be saying no. You're not going to introduce another major stimulus. You think that the measures taken will be enough?
We are now doing something for this November, and we have stimulus activities still working. Don't forget, for instance, short-term allowance has been prolonged up to the end of the next year. For instance, all the special support for stabilizing economic situations of the economic sector will be continued, I think, up to the summer of next year, and if necessary, longer. We have the ability to do that, and we announced that we will do it, but it is already decided. So all these things are working, and though it was a decision we took before the crisis, we shouldn't forget that in the 1st of January, we will have a very severe reduce in taxes for many people. So the special tax we took for financing the unification of Germany will end for more than 90% paying it. There will be a tax reduction for lower and middle class incomes and for families. So this all will come together on the beginning of the next year. And it is really something that really fits into the economic recovery, though it was a decision taken before.
Thank you. Questions are coming in, Vice-Chancellor. We have one, Philip Rousseau in Belgium. Europe should surely now move ahead faster. The response to COVID has not been strong enough from the EU, but of course you were partially behind the EU fiscal stimulus. So, I mean, I hope I'm not mistranslating Philly, but Europe should surely now move ahead faster. I think that, does that mean coming together? And I was going to come back to that. You mentioned it at the top. Is it now the time for there to be fiscal union in the European Union, precisely to deal with this sort of EU-wide issue?
We took strong and fast decisions in Germany, just to say it's in the beginning. And I think the stabilizing package we decided on in spring was the first and the biggest in Europe. This was so also for our recovery program we decided on in June this year. It was also the first and the biggest. And we did not just stick to our own problems. We worked very hard to work on the architecture for having a common answer in the whole union. And it was first the decision of the finance ministers, which was before summer, that we said we will have a special program of more than 200 billion euros for small and medium-sized companies to be supported with credit lines from the EIB, which is helping, especially in those countries which don't have systems like this as we have in Germany for supporting the economy with this instrument. We decided to use this short-term allowance scheme we have in Germany, Kurzarbeit, all over Europe. It's the SURE program of the European Union. It's now used by nearly 100 million euro asked from the member states. And we opened a credit line at the European Stabilized ESM.
It's still not, that's still not fiscal union, is it? But are you saying it's a step towards it? It's the way
a step towards. It's the first decisions. And the main message coming from these decisions of the finance minister, which already announced the next aspect, which I will tell you afterwards, is that the markets accepted that there will be cooperation in Europe and that we will defend the crisis together. And if you look at the situation since then, you will find that no single country has really a problem to finance its activities. This is absolutely different to the situation we had 10 years ago. And this is the outcome, the moral outcome of these decisions. And it was really the case after we took the decision, even before the programs were implemented. And so I think this is the first answer to the question you raised. And next, we will have now this recovery program and the program for the budget of the next 7 years, the multi-annual financial framework. There are now agreements with the parliaments we can see today. We will have the debates coming to an end the next time. So we will be early enough for all these very complicated decisions before the end of the year. And if you count this together, this is a 500 billion program, which was decided on in the beginning before summer. Then we have the 750 billion euro program. And part of this are grants to member states, altogether 390 billion. Part of the decision is that the union itself will have a sovereign debt in a way and going to the market. The markets are absolutely happy about that. And this decision is linked with two others. And I worked very hard to develop this architecture. The first other is that we said it will be paid back in this 7 years' time of the multi-annual financial framework. So no one can postpone reforms. And the second is that we will have own resources for doing so.
Okay.
And this is what I call the real big step towards a fiscal union. It's what I also called a Hamiltonian moment, which is quite nice after the United States elections.
It's music to some people's ears.
And I think it's the right way.
Okay. A question's just come in, which actually dovetails with my next question to you, which was that you say they're going to pay it back in 7 years, but you know how difficult COVID has made the economic situation. And I was going to ask you, how are you going to afford the Green Deal that you've introduced? You know, how do you build back better and with the sustainability of the Green Deal ideas at a time when you are in possibly more financial trouble than you were in 2008? But let me put it to you with Frank Zergat's question. The real crisis, which we've forgotten about, is the climate crisis. This situation is an opportunity to massively push ahead with action on sustainability.
I do agree with him and his question. And so it is something that is part of our decisions. If you look at the recovery program in Germany, you will find it is a program that reacts to the crisis of this year and the next year, but it's also a program with a longer perspective and implements a lot of decisions which are necessary for working on the aim of being 2050 a CO2 neutral country. Economically successful, but CO2 neutral. And this is the same for the European Union. If you look at the program, there is a lot of future investment, which is mostly referring to the necessities of reducing climate emissions and working on the aim of having a CO2 neutral European Union. I think it is a big task, but the biggest problem in the debates we face today is that it is mostly argued in a moral sense, which is right so, but is not all we should do. 200 years of producing wealth via industrialization. Folk are founded, are working on the ground of using fossil resources. 200 years. And if we now follow the aim, and we should, that 2050, in 30 years, we should have a very strong economic development in Europe, but we want to be CO2 neutral, is the biggest technological revolution needed that we could imagine. And there could be, yeah.
Sorry, this is what I'm getting at. I mean, you are a politician, a very, very senior one. Our experiences of politicians is that sometimes they will take the short term in order to be popular and to continue in power. Because again, I put it to you, given the depth of the financial crisis due to COVID, we had only just recovered from 2008. How do you afford the measures that are in the deal when you know that they're very expensive?
There are expensive parts of it, but we should have a very economic view on that question. Most of the investments involved will be done by private sectors. There will be a big part of public investment too. But for instance, all the investments of the car industry for electrifying the mobility will be investments of the car industry. What is our task? Our task is to make feasible that you have charging at any place where it is needed. This is an infrastructure decision and investment, which is of the same importance as the infrastructure investments we saw in the 19th century and made industrialization successful, for instance, in Germany, and were the birth of the economic growth of that time. And this is this, at that time we discussed about railways, but today we have to discuss about charging stations. We have to discuss about of the grid, which is necessary if you want to have renewable energies. It's completely different and much stronger and more. It has to be much more effective than we have the one we have today. It's investment that has already should have started already and should be very strong in the next time. It is the discussion of hydrogen and its use. If you want to have the industrial use of hydrogen, which could become as important as the use of gas and oil today, it is absolutely necessary that we develop the grid where the hydrogen could be brought from one place to the other. Also, we have to develop an industry that is working globally as the gas and oil industry is doing today. And all this has to happen the next years. So I think a politician just reduced to short-term thinking today is not matching the task of today. And the next 10 years will be the most decisive for our future. And they will also decide whether Europe will be able to be part of the front runners of economic development in the future world or not.
Yeah, I mean, I do know that Germany is one of the leading manufacturers, I believe it's of solar panels. I mean, you know, you get about as much sun as we do, but you are obviously looking ahead into that market to sell them. A question from David Reed, who, unless you have been knighted by Her Majesty without me noticing it, has called you Sir Olaf. I don't think you've yet had a visit to Buckingham Palace.
No.
Give it time. How did Sir Olaf feel with the EU referendum result? Will Germany work around the clock to conclude a deal with the UK? And is Biden going to be easier to work with than Trump? 3 questions for you. So first, take him in. How did you feel about the referendum, our referendum result?
We have to. I'm not happy that the UK will leave the European Union. I always said, when I was the mayor of Hamburg, I did my small own activity to support a good decision, inviting the then Prime Minister of the UK to a big meal in Germany in my city hall together with the Chancellor. But it did not help, as many other activities did not help. So the decision is done by the people of the UK. They have to decide, and we have to accept it. I want to have good cooperation between the EU and UK. But what I think anyone in UK should understand, it will be always a cooperation between the real EU. We will not go back to the 19th or 18th century, where the big powers in Europe, Russia, Germany, no, not Germany, then Prussia and Austria, and France and Great Britain. It will be a different world, and one of the most important part of it will be the EU.
I'm going to come back to that in a moment, but I think I know the answer. Will Germany work around the clock to conclude a deal with the UK?
We work within the European Union together with our friends, and the Union is doing the talks.
And is Biden going to be easier to work with than Trump?
I think he is really someone that understands the needs for international cooperation and multilateralism. And so, as I said in the beginning, there is a good chance for a new chapter of transatlantic partnership, and being one that really underlines the need for a good cooperation between the EU and the United States. I think this is something which is really promising.
Let me come back to your previous answer about this will not be a Westphalian system, you know, the balances of power, which I accept. The 27 are the 27, but you know within the 27 there are blocks. The Visegrad group, for example, is unhappy with some of the pronouncements that come out of Berlin. The Scandinavians, some nations are more peripheral than others. I'm not advocating this, but is it not possible that Britain can join the EFTA countries as a cooperative but alternative economic bloc, that Britain cannot forge strong relationships in the defense sphere with people like Poland and the Baltic states? Do you not see that those things may arise?
My view is we will not go back to the 19th, 18th, and 17th century. And it would be a political mistake to work on getting there. No one will be successful also. And yes, there are different views within the European Union Why not? We are not living in a democracy is not about many people assembling. Someone is coming from heaven and giving them the same opinion in 1 second. The reality is struggling, but it's not a problem. It's the question we have to solve and that we have to find together. And this year is showing that we are able to, in a very deep crisis, Europe acts together, helps all the member states that need to be supported. And this, I think, is the new message which anyone should understand. There is a good chance for a better union.
Some people think the EU can't survive in its present form, that it has to become more defederal. But are you going to go with Mr. Macron together down the more federal road?
Macron really raises the important questions of sovereignty, and I'm very much supporting the idea, which is saying we can have sovereignty if we act together. This obviously means that some decisions will not be taken on the national level. So I really very much support the idea of having majority decisions. For instance, when may be a qualified majority, but majority decisions of the foreign ministers, of the finance ministers, which will make the integration process even easier. We don't want to have a European Union which will make anything the same in any country. We have different cultural and political traditions. The only thing is what puts us together is the idea of democracy, the rule of law, something like social market economy that is a bit different to the rest of the world, the social welfare state in different ways we have it, but combining it and putting it together, I think, will be important for our common future.
Our head of ENEX, Adrian's just getting in touch with a question on populism. I mean, we've touched on this a little bit. I mean, you know, Mr. Trump may not have won, but he won 70 million votes, which suggests that the populism there, it increased, it didn't decline. And you have the AfD, we have parties here, right across Europe. There are political parties now which are household names, but 10 years ago, we would have struggled to name anything except the Front National in France. What are you doing to combat populism and to make sure that the center ground holds? Because it seems to me that populism has not peaked either in America or here.
First, the analysis is not absolutely correct. There has been not just the Front National. If you look at the Netherlands, they have a populist movement for a very long time. We have it in Austria with a party like the FPÖ. We have it in the Scandinavian countries for some decades. If you look at
not with
Norway,
the level now that we know of them.
I knew of them. The Norwegian one, the Danish one. We now have new ones in Sweden and in Finland, and as you mentioned, in Germany. So I think the right question is to understand why this is happening. And if you look at the countries involved in Europe, or if you look at the United States, for instance, it is one of the consequences of it's something that's happening in rich countries. And it is a consequence of the development of what Michael Young called meritocracy. I think, I don't know whether you read his very small book where he looks, written 1958, where he looks back to from 2035 to our times. And if you read it, it looks as he was reporting the real life we are living in.
It's had quite an influence in intellectual circles here, yes.
Yeah, and if you now read the new book of Michael Sandel, The Tyranny of Merit,
yes,
you will find the same question in there, which is saying that there is a question for a big part of the population, if they feel that their activities, their lives, their perspectives are treated with respect, if they are seen, and if they count. My view is that the openness of our societies produced new problems. And some of them are that there are really people not thinking that someone that is doing his good job, working somewhere in building houses, or doing the job on the streets, or working in the bakery or somewhere else, gets not the feeling that he is doing something worth the same as the thing you do and I do, and many other peoples. And if we don't change this view on the question, we will not be able to defeat populism. But if we understand that just a country that sticks together, that cohesion is the right answer to the development of the future, and that we need new coalitions of people that work together on a common view on their society. The people in the hippest districts of our towns, working in some marketing agencies or somewhere else, as well as those who are just cleaning the streets. It is not the right thing to understand that they have different perspectives, and to deal with this question like a car manufacturer having a small car for those, having a big car for those, and things like that. So I think really we have to change. And this is possibly one of the advantages of Joe Biden. Looking at him, which we all together did for a long time, I remember something which he said at Davos, and at many other places too. He always mentioned, they call me middle class Joe, and they don't understand it as a compliment. And he has the right feeling. Let's work it out.
As you've returned us to the US election, is it time for Mr. Trump to concede?
Yes, I think so. And it would be very good, because we all in a democracy have our own task to make it happen. And this is now, if there are elections, you have to accept them.
You give no credence to the ideas of irregularities in the vote, and consequently, you don't have to concede until you've gone through every court case.
It does not look like there is no evidence for that. And we all read about the reports also of international organizations looking at the elections. So there is no evidence. It is his right to go to courts. This is something which you have to accept if there's the rule of law. Mm-hmm. But aside of using your rights, you have a political task to act according to what is the idea of good action, in a way. And
I'm reminded of Mr. Gore in 2000. He said, for the good of the nation, for the unity of the nation. Just on a related question to the one we were just talking about, you talked about the cohesiveness of society. I wondered what you felt about Mr. Macron's recent pronouncements about the cohesiveness of French society, because it has upset some people.
I think that it is necessary that we understand that we have to make it easy for anyone that he has a good chance in his life, that we have to deal with respect. And one of the activities of one of us as politicians must be that someone going to his pension and looking back to his work life says it was a good life. And it must be the same if he worked at a restaurant, if he worked at somewhere else, it must be the same that he could say it as the one that did some other jobs. And this, I think, is of importance. It has to do with paying, it has to do with rights, it has to do with social welfare, with education and things like that. But it has also to do with respect. And I think this is the one important question which should drive our policies in the future. And the other one is that we understand together that we have a common task to make our democracies and our life together successful.
we've got about 10 minutes left, Vice-Chancellor, and I'll come to some of the more questions. But just listening to you speaking there, it's clearly that some of these thoughts are coming from a bedrock foundation of thoughts. What are your influences? I mean, in Britain, often somebody would say something like John Stuart Mill or Keynes or whatever. What are your influences in that shape your political philosophies?
It's always changing. I'm reading a lot, and as you found out in our interview here, and I'm always discussing about the future of our society. I think it is important that we work on solidarity in our societies, and it's even more important for the future. And there are a lot of theories supporting this idea.
Okay, I was looking for some names that I'm vaguely aware of, like Schiller or Goethe or some of the writers. There must be somebody that I've heard of.
No, being a politician which is in the public, I'm not inventing things, and so I'm looking at a lot of different views. And as you know, I joined my party when I was 17. And I'm still there, so you could understand where my political philosophy is.
Yeah, I could make an educated guess. Marx, you probably read, but perhaps less of an influence. I've got a couple more questions for you, sir. One is quite pointed from Collins. Was the policy of austerity as dictated by Schäuble a mistake, pouring more debt onto the Greeks when they already had too much debt? Going back at what, 10 years now, yeah.
I was always supporting the idea that we should help the Greek. And in the end, we did. And when I became the Minister of Finance, I worked very hard to do the last steps of the program with no political embarrassment in Germany. And it worked. And this is how it was. There was no real public debate on giving the last steps of support. I think this is the right way to handle things.
Thank you. Victoria Way from the Far East. What would be Germany's position in dealing with China? What about the EU, particularly now that the US-China relations have been shaky under the Trump administration, and that China is not really progressing into a democracy? So, you know, all countries have that difficult balancing act of dealing with China economically and dealing with China politically. How do you deal with China?
First, we deal together as European Union. This is important that we act together. And especially trade relations are a question that is legally task of the Union. So I think this is one of the things we should understand. We have questions to China also in trade relations. As you know, there is a lot of talk on this question going on. In some cases, we have the same questions as the United States had before the Trump administrations and as the United States will have afterwards.
Yes.
So it is necessary that we make international cooperation happen, but international cooperation has the aspect that anyone should cooperate. Mm-hmm. And so we are ready for doing so, and we ask others to do it the same. And this is the important aspect. Looking at the world we are living in and the world that we will live in, I'm sure that for a long time, we will have to deal with the fact that there are a lot of countries that have governments and a political life which is completely different to our ideas. Mm. And since I'm absolutely sure that democracy is something that all people in the world would like to have.
Universal values, which of course...
And is not a question of Western lifestyle or so, it is something much more. Yeah. I'm quite confident that in the end, this will happen to all the people of our planet. And
that's Mr. Biden's view and the arc of history.
This is nothing we can decide on just by our elections. It's something that has to be done by the people themselves.
Sorry to interrupt, Minister. You reminded me of Mr. Biden's remark about the arc of history. We got one more question from our viewers, which is on YouTube, asks about how Europe should respond to the difficulties that they're having with Turkey, and I suppose particularly France is having with Turkey, but everybody's relationship with Turkey.
It is our aim to have a good relation between the European Union and Turkey. We know that there are a lot of questions unsolved today, and but this is even more a task to work on them.
I would press you on that, but we are running out of time. So finally, sir, to yourself, why do you want to be Chancellor of Germany?
I can do it, and I have a plan for the future of Germany and of the European Union. So there are three important questions for me for the future. The first is about respect and working on a society that is giving respect to any person in our country, and so that we have a better development and that the populists are running out. The second is to work on the future, which is mostly meaning that we work on technological progress, otherwise we won't be successful in the world of the future, and work on technological progress which makes it feasible that we will have a CO2 neutral economy. And the third is a strong and sovereign Europe. So three big questions important for the future of Germany and of Europe and a multilateral world.
That was 52 minutes, Vice-Chancellor, which personally I thoroughly enjoyed. I hope you did as well. Certainly hope people watching did. Thank you very much to give us so much time. I know that people at your level tend to live your lives in 15-minute chunks. So to give us a 52-minute chunk, we are very grateful. So Olaf Scholz, Germany's finance minister, Vice-Chancellor of Germany, Dankeschön. And thank you to everybody. Thank you, sir. Thank you to everybody watching this ENEX webinar. There will be more, and we hope you join us then.